Good evening. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the 2024 Military Influencer Conference. I hope everybody's gotten a chance to get settled in and they're ready for a good night. You guys ready for a great conference this week? Excellent. My name is Tom Tran. I was voluntold about an hour ago that I am emceeing this. So I just wanted to come up and welcome everybody to the event. I'm also going to be the host for Comedy Night tomorrow, starring Donnell Rollins from The Chappelle Show, so I hope you come out to that. I am an Army veteran myself. Relax, I was a cook. Slow down. You'll see me walking around with this sling for the next couple days. So before everybody asks me the same question everybody's been asking me, what's the other guy looks like? She's fine. Little Asian woman came out of nowhere and hit me. Never mind, it's fine. But I got told I was doing this. I had to MC and I had to welcome everybody. And the only reason I said yes was because I have a borderline inappropriate Jack Carr related story that I wanted to tell. But I don't know if HR will fire me on the first day, so.
I mean, we'll make it find out.
All right, we'll find out. Okay, so Jack Carr, you guys know who Jack Carr is, obviously. All right. So he has, Amazon picked up his show, Terminalist, and I am an actor in Los Angeles, and I was asked to audition for the show, and I said, great. And then the consultant said he wanted to talk to me over Zoom to learn who I was and talk about my career in the Army. And I said, great, it's a Zoom call. Do I have to stand up at all? And I was told no. So there I was in my Ranger panties, and I was asked to stand up and clear a room. And as I stood up, the casting director said, I can see your balls. And then I said, I'm probably not getting this part, am I? So that's why you won't see me on that show, which is fine, Okay, I got a gauge for the room. Now let me bring up your actual host for the evening. I just wanted to welcome you all again. Please give a big round of applause for the cast and the staff of the Military Influencer Conference for putting this together. Before you go, give them a big round of applause. And now, let me bring up your host, who will actually be doing the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, please, big round of applause for Barney Scovelin.
Hello. I'm really excited about this. This is the Military Influencer Conference. We're doing it in Atlanta, Georgia. How many people do we have here from Atlanta? Yay! Yeah. Okay, so when we do this in post, can we pipe in some audience excitement? Great. Hey guys, I'm really, really excited about this tonight. One of my favorite authors, Jack Carr, is here. Really important book that just came out about the Beirut bombing in 1983. We're 21 years, almost to the day, since that bombing, but also a prolific author, former Navy SEAL, and all-around great guy. So I'd love to bring Jack up and his co-author, Scott. I just met him tonight. Forgive me. James M. Scott. There you go. Hey. So we'll do this. All right. Do you guys have microphones?
It's all right. We pass this right now?
Yeah.
We got microphones coming. All right. Here we go.
All right.
Testing. There we go. How's that?
All right. We're live.
Marty, good to see you. What's happening?
Oh, just hanging out at Military Influencer Conference
Good to see
in Atlanta,
you here.
Georgia.
Yeah, this is awesome. I don't think I need these right now. Very cool. All right,
yeah.
let's do this.
Yeah. Hey, so Jack, I want to start off real quick. I first became aware of you back in, I think, 2018. I just started a little blog called Coffee or Die Magazine, and I had a writer. His name was Justin. He hit me up, and he said, hey, I got this author. He's about to come out with a book. It's going to be really good. And he's a former Navy SEAL sniper. And I'm like, all right, Justin, if this guy's even actually a Navy SEAL or a sniper, all right, cool.
Are you shocked?
Yeah, well, like, cool. Navy SEALs writing a book. There's a groundbreaking
Another one.
story here. We did the story, and then I found out a little bit about your background. I was like, is actually a Navy SEAL, was actually a sniper, and one heck of an author. I just use that as a lead-in is,
He gave me one of my favorite blurbs ever. It was the first
Yeah.
one before the book even came out. And it was I forget exactly right now, but it's in almost every book in the blurb section. And it was like a tapestry of carnage and death or something like that, which was awesome.
yeah, it was fun writing, getting that story out there about your first book, Terminal List, now a very famous TV show on Amazon. You guys did a wonderful
I
job
almost
with
moved
that.
Well done. Nice.
There we go.
Nice.
But I want to, going back all the way then, you must have just been in the process of retiring from the Navy. How did you make your jump into full-time authoring?
Yeah, well, I was lucky that I knew exactly what I wanted to do from my earliest days, which is serve my country in uniform and then write thrillers. Because back then, you could find the end of the internet as far as when it comes to special operations. You could go to the library and look up Navy SEAL or look up Special Operations Vietnam, and there wasn't that much. But I remember that coming away from that research at age 7 was that SEALs are some of the most they're some of the best operators in the world, and the training's some of the toughest ever devised by a modern military. So I was in. I was reading everything I could find, to including on Beirut when that happened. That was a very impactful moment for me. And then was reading all the thrillers of the day by Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden and all these guys who had protagonists that had backgrounds in special operations. They were either like Marine snipers in Vietnam or Navy SEALs in Vietnam or Army Special Forces Vietnam or CIA paramilitary Vietnam. And so I was getting an early education in the art of storytelling from the masters.
Things that I love about you, you are one of those guys that you are an author, but you're a student of the craft. You're somebody that can go down the rabbit hole on genre fiction like Tom Clancy or literary fiction. I know you read Hemingway. I think you have one of Hemingway's typewriters.
It's true. Yeah, it was a gift from a fan.
Yeah. And, also somebody, we've talked just or talked about, story arcs and character arcs, and you're a student of the craft. I know you're the son of a librarian. How impactful was that for you as in your career as a storyteller now?
Yeah, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. I'm going back now and actually getting all the first editions signed of all the paperbacks that I had growing up from all those guys that I just mentioned. So the library is constantly growing, and I use all of it for research. I have a whole nonfiction room and a whole fiction room. So I've never not had a book in hand or known exactly what I was going to be reading next.
That's amazing. Now, I want to shift into, your current book, Targeted Beirut. I have, admittedly, it just came out. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm very familiar with it. I noticed that this book comes out right around the same time that one of the leaders responsible for that attack was recently killed. You have a little bit of a penchant for books coming out with impeccable timing between this and then Devil's Hand, a book about, that has bioterrorism themes coming out during the COVID pandemic. How are you doing it? Or is this just dumb luck?
It's trade secrets, my friend. Trade secrets. But this was one. I mean, it's crazy. 2.5 years ago when we first connected on doing this, we had no idea, obviously, what was gonna happen and how timely it was gonna be. We always knew it was gonna be important from just a historical standpoint and being able to understand some of those lessons of the past and apply them to current problem sets. But obviously, not knowing what was gonna occur this very day right now, where we have Israeli tanks massing on the border of Lebanon and going to be moving towards Beirut probably sometime in some sort of a limited incursion. Maybe right now. It's quite possible. But when I tell how we linked up, and so I always knew that I would make that transition into the nonfiction space. I saw what Tom Clancy did during the 80s from the fan perspective. So I saw, okay, Hunt for Red October comes out in 1984, and then Red Storm Rising, and then Patriot Games, and Cardinal of the Kremlin, and Clear and Present Danger. And then in the early 90s, Tom Clancy diversifies and starts doing nonfiction with the guy. His first one was Submarine Guided Tour series, and then he had a Study in Command series as well. So for those who have read the thrillers, you know that I weave a lot of history into those novels, and then if you follow me on social media, you know that I also try to bring awareness to different terrorist events, specifically on the anniversary of those events. And when I thought I built up enough political capital with Simon & Schuster, I pitched the idea of doing a nonfiction series exploring different terrorist events that were really kind of impactful on U.S. foreign policy, might be the best way to say it. And so they were on board, of course, and I told them I didn't want it to be like pop history. I didn't want it to be me reading a bunch of books on the Middle East and terrorism, regurgitating those things, and then giving my analysis of it, and then getting it out there. I wanted this to be an actual work of history, going to primary sources, and I wanted to work with someone who actually knew what they're doing in this space. And there was one person that I wanted to work with, and that is James Scott right here. And it sounds strange today because I probably should have gone onto YouTube and looked at some sort of an interview with you or something like that to make sure you weren't like a crazy person or like mean or like, I don't know, get some sort of a sense as to who you were. But I just love the work. So he has 5 books out, 4 on World War II and 1 on the USS Liberty. And I just love the work. So I was on a call with my publisher and my agent, and I said, yeah, this guy James Scott, and I had all his books right there. And they said, well, who's his agent? And I was looking in the back and the acknowledgments or the author's note in the beginning, and I said, well, he's thanking this guy named John Glussman. And my publisher, Emily Bessler, at Emily Bessler Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, she said, what? John Glussman? That's my husband. So I was like, wow, this is very convenient for me. And so they connected us, and we hit it off, and James was, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so when Jack Carr calls you up and says, I want to work on a project, you pretty much jump right on that opportunity, as you guys can all imagine. So it's funny, actually, because when we were after we'd been connected, my editor actually was, I was during the end of the pandemic, and so there's a lot of remote working and everything. And so I was in a phone call with him because I had another project lined up, and they were gracious enough to give me an extension for a year so that I could work on this book. And I remember my editor saying, James, whatever you do, just don't screw this up for me, because of it. His home life depended upon this thing working out well. But Jack's an awesome guy. We've had just a tremendous friendship, collaboration on this. I mean, it has turned out to be an incredibly timely book with everything that's going on. In fact, David Brown, our publicist from Simon & Schuster, is here right up front. David actually texted us about a week ago when all the pagers blew up, and he said, I just want to let you guys know, we keep the IDF on standby to help out with publicity. And so it turned out to be pretty much spot on there. So.
And somebody had the idea to send out the books in packaging. I send out a lot of the books in different packaging to different friends out there. Lots of thank yous, and no one has any social media presence, and then friends that also have some sort of a social media presence. And somebody had the idea to send them out with pagers.
Well, we got this really good deal on them.
From a company in Taiwan. Very murky who actually owns it, but that's all right. Make sure they're
If you look under your seat right now, there's a pager.
Reach into your seat. Exactly. And at the time, though, you were actually thinking about making a move from because you've done multiple books on World War II, and we're thinking about moving into another space or what to do next. Yeah.
Yeah. This is just an amazing opportunity, and it's so much of what's going on in the world really tracks back to this one pivotal year in 1983. We see it now when we look back. We're 40 years later, you can see that it's the tail end of the Cold War. The Cold War is really winding down. America's about to get much, much more involved in the Middle East. And it's, in fact, it's going to dominate, American foreign policy for the next 4 decades. And all of that, the fulcrum on which all of that really switches is 1983. And, of course, it begins with the Hezbollah, which, of course, at that point was this small, homegrown terrorist organization in Lebanon backed by Iran. Of course, it's going to begin in April of 1983 when they blow up our embassy there, kill 63 people, including 17 Americans, wipe out the CIA station that's there. And, of course, that's going to pale in comparison to the attack 188 days later when the Hezbollah comes again for the United States, this time for the Marine headquarters and barracks there on a Sunday morning at 6:21 a.m.
So, James, I know that you're a reporter by trade first, and when you dive into a topic like this, I imagine you're diving into the National Archives, you're looking up old newspaper clippings. I know you're interviewing primary sources. Did you also have to submit for any Freedom of Information Act requests? Like, how far did you have to go to get original information for this story?
Yeah, we did all of that. And I'll tell you, of course, there's always the archival work. So we, you go to the Marine Corps Archives in Quantico, and, they've got the monthly command chronologies, they've got the weekly sit reps, they've got the daily message traffic. Out of the Reagan Library, we were really lucky because a lot of the stuff that hits the 40-year mark, a lot of it's been declassified, so we're able to get the agendas, the meeting minutes from the National Security Council sessions. We're able to get the planning papers, the white papers, things of that nature, Reagan's diary, all that. But really a big part of this story came from the fantastic cooperation we had from the Beirut veterans. I mean, really, we did over 100 hours of interviews with survivors. A lot of the family members, the widows of the men who were killed, the children of the men who were killed, even the parents in some cases, and they could not have been more gracious. And they provided us over 1,000 pages of their letters and diaries. We even got, if you remember your Sony Walkman from the 80s, right? So back then, of course, people were recording messages on cassettes and mailing them. And so a lot of folks had those. We got over 9 hours of recordings from one of the guys who had been killed, whose wife had held that and had it digitized. And so we were able to listen to that. So really, I mean, it was just writing a book like this is a historical scavenger hunt. You're piecing it all together, but, it all really came together really perfectly. And it wouldn't happen without those Beirut survivors and their families.
And Jack, I know for you do extensive research for your fiction novels. I know you've traveled all over the world, and that's a lot of the color that you bring to your book. It comes from those travels and those interviews that you do. Did you learn anything working with James that you are saying, like, I need to bring that into my own workflow on the fiction side as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, the main thing was just making sure this was done appropriately, legally, because in the fiction, if I make a mistake, not that I ever have, but I'm saying if I ever did, then I could just say it's fiction. And in this, you don't have that luxury, especially when you're dealing with a topic like this, when you're writing about people who are still with us, who ran to the sound of that blast and were digging through the rubble for their buddies with their bare hands, K-bar knives, maybe a shovel or a crowbar if they could find it, and family members who have had an empty seat at that dinner table since October 23rd of 1983. So you can't make those kind of mistakes. And from our first time that we talked, what we wanted to do was really just get out of the way of other people's stories. That's why it's not my book, it's not James's book, it's the story of the people who were there and the family members who lost loved ones. And so getting out of the way of those stories was the goal from the very beginning. And some of these stories are just, I mean, they're just heart-wrenching. If you've heard the podcast, you can hear some of the guys. We interview some of the guys, and you can hear it in their own words, some of the stories that are in here. But it was emotional too. So when I talked to Simon & Schuster, my goal at the beginning was to capture the strategic, the operational, and the tactical lessons learned, and then humanize it as well, because you hear 241 Americans killed, it's a big number, but until you humanize it and hear these stories about each one of them, and whether they made it home or they didn't, what happened on that day had multi-generational impacts. And it was a very emotional story to research, to write, to edit, to talk about in interviews, and that became really the driving force of it. Was really those human stories that are in here, and also it was extremely humbling and a huge responsibility to tell those stories, to get this trust from these veterans who really felt like the Marine Corps moved on very quickly in the wake of this event. This was not raising the flag on Iwo Jima. This was a dark day for the Marine Corps, and a lot of them felt that the Marine Corps moved on very quickly, that they were forgotten. It was a very small number of people who served there. It wasn't World War II that affected an entire generation. It wasn't Vietnam that affected you, whether you knew someone overseas, were overseas, or you could watch the news every night, see what was happening on that first televised war, and then also see what the civil craziness going on in the streets, and sort of it impacted you. This was a very small number of people, and they were so thankful that someone was finally going to tell their stories. So that was a huge responsibility that we took extremely seriously.
And James, for you, coming from primarily writing about World War II, that's a different process, right? And maybe there's almost, not that it's less, but there's certainly a lot more written about World War II at this point. Beirut really, I mean, I know there's some reporting that's been done out there, but this is really kind of unique. What was that like going into such fresh, not just modern territory in the context of this, but kind of, hey, you don't have to compete with a lot of other authors.
Yeah, actually, that's actually one of the great things. I mean, if you look at, for instance, if you're writing about D-Day, there have been 1,000 books done on D-Day, right? There have been over 230 books done on the Battle of the Bulge. So when you start out, to take on a topic like that, you start out by doing a big literature review to see what has been done on a topic and what is new that I can provide here. So when we started out with Beirut, first thing we did was a literature review. And there was one book that had been done on Beirut. It was done in 1984 by Eric Hamill. It's called The Root. And Eric Hamill's deceased now. I mean, the book came out literally 40 years ago. He didn't have access to any of the top secret materials that were in the Reagan archives today, any of the meeting minutes, any kind of the decision-making process and whatnot that was going on in Washington. And so for us, I mean, really, this was an opportunity to really plow this ground fresh. And so, and also, some of the guys at that time, even in 84, didn't really want to talk to him. Two of our key characters, the two dentists, who really took over the rescue effort after the battalion surgeon was killed and so many of the corpsmen were killed, they were both still on active duty at that time. And so when a reporter comes around 1984 and wants to talk to you, a lot of the guys didn't want to talk. And so we were actually able to get interviews and documents and things of that nature. So for a historian, that's exactly what you want. I mean, that's the gold mine. And I think as a result of that, this will be the go-to book for a number of years here because we did benefit from all that.
They were ready to tell their story too. It seemed like they were ready after all this time. It was time. They're getting up there a little bit older, but enough time had passed where they wanted to reflect on it and go back there and get their stories told.
I think this is something that we run into a lot when anybody that's in the storytelling space for the military veteran communities, they run into the closer you are to sort of the event, whatever that event was, the more hesitant people are to talk about it. And the further they get away from it, the more they start to realize, one, gosh, it's important just for posterity, this is American history, right? It's important to have these stories told. If I was there, then I have a duty. I think some of these people start to realize they have a duty to talk to a reporter, to a writer, and make sure that this story is recorded. But I think that there's like a larger message out there of, hey, it's important, no matter, for all the military and veterans out here in the audience today, it's important to write things down. Even if you are just taking your experiences and putting them in a Word doc, printing it out and shoving them in a drawer, someday there's going to be a Jack Carr, a James Scott that's going to go through that primary material. It might be 200 years from now, or it might just be your great grandkids. They're going to have a better understanding of where they came from, and there's going to be a more well-rounded American history. I'm kind of just saying a statement there. I'm not being a very good host here with the question, but
totally
feel free to add on
as a
it.
historian, like, I love pack rats. I mean, look, people who don't throw things away are a gold mine for us. And like one of my favorites was Jimmy Doolittle, who led the legendary raid over Tokyo. I mean, if he wrote a note on a cocktail napkin, he kept it, and it took me weeks to go through all of his stuff when I did a book on him. I'm grateful to those people, and so what worries me going forward is just that we live in an era where if you write a letter, you're going to keep it. A letter is something treasured, but a text message, you really going to keep that? You're going to come back from deployment and print all those out and put them in a folder for your kids to read? I mean, our messaging these days is so much more temporary than it was then, and I do worry going forward what that's going to be like for 40 years from now, 50 years from now, when the next guys are coming along trying to plow that ground. So I totally echo you that. Print that stuff out, put it in a folder, hold on to it. Future generations are going to want it.
Yeah, and they might have to get in some hieroglyphics if it's in the future and they're looking at these text messages. They're going to be like, wait, prayer hands, thumbs up, beer mugs, like what is that? What did he mean? There'll be a whole section of history that's just.
How's that going to look in a book?
Oh,
Are you going to put quote marks around that?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll find out. We're going to find out at one point. Yeah.
Somewhere there's a publisher working on that very question right now. They're probably running into that.
Well, the World War II guys, so Nick is out here somewhere. I ran into her in the lobby, and she helped me sign those books in there. So thank you, Nick, wherever you are out there. And we were out with the Best Defense Foundation, taking World War II veterans back to the battlefields on which they fought over the last few years. And some of these guys didn't talk about it until they were 90. Or like 85, some guys 95, and then they start talking about their experience. And so as they get older, and I think they get around some other guys, especially at the Best Defense Foundation, going back to Pearl Harbor, going back to Normandy, going back to the Netherlands. And some of these guys wrote books at age 85, 90, 95, 100, and they're amazing. So yeah, with the passage of time, I think it becomes a little more acceptable, or you look back on it maybe a little differently, or realize that it's important to get those lessons learned out there for future generations.
So a little bit of a pivot here. you're a nonfiction writer. Have you ever thought about trying your hand at fiction? And Jack, now that you've tackled both genre fiction and nonfiction, are you thinking about going down the Hemingway route and doing a little bit of literary fiction?
Literary fiction. Describe literary fiction for me.
I think of literary fiction in the most simple way as they're
Straight
one-off books. They're not in series. They don't have recurring character arcs. I think of Movable Feast or some of Kurt Vonnegut's books, or I don't know, like even you can go to like Jack Kerouac, right? Like some of these different folks that I think that they're one-off books, they're one-off stories, and I think of that as literary fiction. Whereas if it's a series, I then maybe rightfully or not put that into like the genre fiction. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Some people talk about genre like it's a bad thing. It's not. I love it. No, I love it. I grew up on Tom Clancy. I definitely joined the military thinking that I was going to eventually get the invite to Rainbow Six. And John Clark was somebody that like made a very strong argument for me about why I should be a SEAL. And then I realized I can't swim. But you know, so there's that. But no, so like some of my favorite authors growing up were genre authors, and I think that they set a great example for that. So again, don't mean it in a derogatory way at all. But yeah, are you going to try your hand on one-off stories?
You know, literary fiction also has another characteristic you forgot to mention, except for those ones from the past. I'm talking about more modern literary fiction, and that one thing is very important, and that factor is that it doesn't sell.
Are we talking about literary fiction or poetry?
No, literary fiction. You know,
I'm a big fan of both, by the way, for anybody out there that's a literary author or poet. I'm a fan, but yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get too snooty about it. It's just writing, you know, I just write to write. It's all about the story for me. I never think about, is this going to sell? Am I going to offend anyone? What's better, long chapters or short chapters today? Can I grab something from the headline so it'll be timely? I never think about any of those things at all. And it's all about the story because people are trusting me with their time that they're never going to get back. And a way to honor that is I just focus on the story. That's the best way I can honor people who are trusting me with their time. So I never really think of it as far as categories or anything else. I only think about it as far as story.
James, what about you? Are we going to see a fiction?
Yeah, no, I love what I do. I mean, telling true stories is like it's a historical scavenger hunt. You know, you're building out a puzzle, and every document you find, every interview you conduct, every nugget you pull out of an archive, it all fits together to create this mosaic of what happened. And for me, it's like an education, and every book is like a PhD dissertation. You know, by the time you finish it, you're kind of an expert on that topic. And I'm kind of a constant student. I just love that, and I really love the relationships, the folks you get to meet and interview, and so it's a really rewarding experience. So.
I'm glad you said that because we have a few more nonfictions to do. I'm glad you answered it that way. And for those that don't know that don't have James's books, please, you got to add them to your library. The next one he's working on right now that he put on pause to do this with me, it's about the 3 days between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so luckily my editor and publisher happens to be married to your editor, so he made a wise decision in letting you push that contract a little bit and extend that deadline. So that'll be the one that comes next. Also, Pulitzer Prize finalist and Neiman Fellow at Harvard. So big deal right here. And I just appreciate that you did this with me. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been awesome.
Well, so to kind of cap this off, speaking of other nonfiction stories out there, when I think about Beirut, some of the other things that come to mind in a similar vein, we've got Desert One in the early 80s. We've got the USS Cole bombing. I think even Grenada and Panama kind of find their way into this. Those are not Middle East centric, of course, but the 80s, late 70s and the early 80s, we saw the birth of counterterrorism. And terrorism and counterterrorism, I should say, as a tactic, as a strategy. I'm not trying to pin you down on what the next book is, but can you tell me where your head's at as you consider what the next stories might be?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot to choose from. And when I first talked to Simon & Schuster about this, I wrote down every terrorist event I could think of from the end of World War II up to 3 years ago when I first discussed it with them. So there's a lot out there. And the reason that it was important to start with Beirut was because 1983 is such a pivotal year when it comes to our relationship with the Middle East. And there were terrorist events before, there were terrorist events after, but those those terrorist events after really fell back on the model and the paradigm established by Iran, really through its proxies back in 1983. So one of the big lessons learned of Beirut for the enemy is that terrorism works. They got the political end state that they wanted and through an act of violence, through an act of terrorism. And really, we've been playing by those rules, as is Israel to a lesser extent, since 1983. And those rules were set by Iran. We're now starting to see that, I think, over the last 3 months or so. There's been a change to that from the Israeli side, not on our side, but on the Israeli side. They started to shift over the last few months with some of their operations, culminating with the killing of Nasrallah on Friday, and then with the tanks that are massing on the border of Lebanon right now. But coming back to the Beirut 1983 is such a pivotal time. And so going forward from here, once again, unfortunately, there's a lot to choose from.
All right. Well, I think that's about everything. I don't want to spoil anything in the book. And by that, I mean, I haven't read the book yet. I can't wait to dive in. This is a topic that is fascinating to me. So glad that the both of you teamed up to write this. Can't recommend it enough to everybody out there to pick this up, whether you're a fan of nonfiction or typically a fiction. Maybe you like to read it. Maybe you wish there were vampires in the Beirut story. I know some readers, that's their thing, but highly recommend picking up the book. And then if you're not familiar with the James Reese series, fantastic storytelling. So, Jack, thanks for being up here.
Yeah. Are we wrapping this up here? Yes, we are. So as we're wrapping this up here, I just want to say one final thing, and that these are parallels to today as well. And a lot of those parallels are on the negative side, meaning a similar thing that happened in Beirut 1983 happened again at Abbey Gate as we're leaving Afghanistan in August of 2021. And that is a bomb goes off. In the case of Beirut, it kills 241 service members. And in Abbey Gate, they killed 13. And they were put there, those soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, both cases, by people in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles from the battlefield. So another main reason I wanted to do this series is so that those who eventually work their way into politics, or as advisors, or part of the bureaucracy that surrounds the military intelligence industrial complex, that they realize that there are long-term, multi-generational impacts to the decisions that they make up here. And this, thank you. And really the decisions made in the Oval Office, they filter all the way down to an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid standing somewhere at a post somewhere in the world, holding a rifle, off safe, finger on trigger, watching a vehicle approach, not knowing if it's laden with explosives or if it has bad suspension. And that's the final decision maker in a chain of decision makers that starts with the President of the United States. So at those levels, their one main task is to understand the nature of the conflict in which we're engaged or about to commit U.S. forces. And there will be real lifelong, multi-generational impacts to those decisions. So as we sit here right now, look at the sunset behind us. It's going down back there, and it means it's coming up in another area of the world where that 18, 19, 20-year-old kid is standing that post. So as we're all out here tonight, let's just send a prayer their way, think about them. And one message of hope as we finish off. Like I said, there's a lot of negativity around those multiple events, but when those bombs went off, both in Beirut and in Afghanistan, the same U.S. service member that was blown off their feet or heard it from across the compound or across the airfield got up and ran to the sound of the explosion, ran to the sound of their guns, to try to save as many of their fellow service members as they possibly could. And that's that same service member that's out there tonight. So thank you guys for having us. Really appreciate it. And we'll see y'all again soon.
What do they say, Jack? Red sky at night?
Sailors delight. All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.